Hey, we're back, and I'm joined in the studio today by Sam Austin. Hi, Sam.
Hi.
You're our first repeat interview.
That's quite an honor.
Yeah, thanks for coming in. The reason we asked you in is because you have printed a 3-part series commentary in Spacing Magazine, their online site. Before we get into that, can you tell us about Spacing? What's Spacing?
Sure. Spacing, it's a magazine, a small magazine out of Toronto. It does have a print edition that comes out, I think it's 4 times a year, but across the country in various cities they have these active blogs where people can write about all sorts of politics and urban issues. So it covers a lot of planning, a lot of politics, and
Great.
local issues as well as national.
And you've been a planning student, correct?
Yes, I did planning here at Dal, and I was fortunate to find work in the city, and I write for Spacing in my spare time.
Yeah. What do you do for work?
I work for the federal government. I'm in Public Works and Government Services Canada.
Great. And we should tell people that you ran for office last time.
I did. I ran in 2012.
For city council
Yes.
against Gloria McCluskey.
Yeah, in Dartmouth.
Yeah. It had a decent showing considering you were going up against Gloria McCluskey.
Yes, we were. We knew it was a long shot. We were quite thrilled to get 20% of the vote, honestly, for the first time out.
Yeah. So campaign finance, this is what you wrote about. Right now I hear thousands of listeners' eyeballs rolling. Like, why should we care about this?
Well, I mean, there's 3 main reasons why we should care. The first one, which is the one that a lot of people jump to right off the bat, is the potential for corruption, because funding political campaigns is one of the few legitimate ways you can actually hand a politician a bunch of money. So with it comes all sorts of risk and of problems, and you see that in other jurisdictions where politicians get themselves into trouble with campaign donors or trying to funnel money around.
So, hey, I'll give you $10,000 if you vote for this project.
Yeah, it can be as crass as that. I don't think that's necessarily what we have as a problem here in Halifax, but we do have 2 other big concerns. The one is kind of the indirect impact on our electoral system. So you might be an ally of my cause already, and so then I give you $10,000 towards your campaign because you're a friend and an ally. Well, then you're more likely to be elected, and you potentially have only certain perspectives getting represented in the legislature.
Now, I should say I've been covering municipal politics, city politics, in various cities across North America for, too long now, 25 years, something like that. And in my observation is that everywhere in city government is dominated by what can loosely be called the development industry. So it's companies and people looking to build projects and all the kind of associated stuff that goes along with that. So real estate agents, people who provide professional services like architectural and engineering services. Those people primarily fund local elections.
Yes, and that's the results here as well, which raises the kind of the third issue that you face with this in terms of it being a problem is the public perception. It's hard to have confidence if you're the public in the results and the decisions that come out of City Hall if they're taking money from the very people that they're regulating in such huge amounts, which is what they are doing in Halifax. It's like half the campaign money for council comes from development interests, and all except for it's only 4 councillors that don't take that didn't take any development money last time out.
Well, we'll get into that in a bit, but I think again at the larger level, you've hit on something that I find interesting. Is that it's a self-selecting group. So people who have nuanced views on development or don't have any views on development at all, or might be completely open-minded about whatever, tend not to get those big developer contributions.
Yeah.
So the people that get them are the people who are already in that camp, and they tend to get elected. So the whole game is kind of rigged for a pro-development industry sort of scenario.
Yes, and I looked at it in past elections as part of my master's degree when I was out west, and I looked at Calgary, Toronto, Winnipeg, and Halifax, about 2 elections in each city around 2000. And the conclusion that came out of my work there is that the typical script for a candidate is the first time out, they have no money at all. And then after a year in office, or the 4 years in office, when they're facing re-election, suddenly all the money they want is available to them. And I think it tends to vary depending on how friendly they've been to the development industry. If they've been very friendly to them, they can count on a huge amount of money. But even if they haven't been all that friendly to them, if they have a bit of a mixed record, they can still get a bunch of money. If you look in this last election that we had, where you had Don Sloan going up against Jennifer Watts, they're both kind of towards the left on the political spectrum. But Sloan, who has voted against some high-profile projects downtown, she had all sorts of developers giving her money. So I think you have a little bit of rewarding friends, but you also have a certain almost payment for access, I guess you could say, right? Wouldn't want to ascribe too much of the motivation there, but it almost seems that the development industry wants a sure thing.
Let me just interrupt quickly and say
Sure.
I'm speaking with Sam Austin, who is a former planning student, former council candidate himself, about campaign finance in Halifax and elsewhere, I guess. But let's name names. Where's the money coming from?
Well, it comes from developers mainly. And
who? Which developers?
The big one by far is Armco. And
George Armoyans.
And it was pointed out to me, and I haven't had a chance to confirm it yet, but in the top 5 who give the most money, Armco is by far, it's like they gave $12,000 to councillors, almost $1,000 to each of them, essentially. Yep. APL Properties also was one of the top donors, and I've been told that that's also Armoyan,
that's
Armoyan
correct.
companies.
That's correct.
Yeah. So it's actually even more than what I first thought.
Yeah.
So the Armco, the Armoyan is a huge one. Hawthorne Capital is another one. And you have Eastport Properties being the third, and then Southwest Properties. And with Southwest, what's interesting is you had about an equal split of contributions from Southwest and an equal split also coming from Jim Spatz personally. Yep. And of course, Southwest is a private company, and he's the guy.
Yeah. It's interesting because, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the company right now, but they're doing that project in on the Bedford Basin outside Burnside, something like Basin Island or something like Dartmouth Island, and they're from Florida, I believe, and they just gave a perfunctory $1,000 contribution to the local councilor, sort of just, who knows what their motivations is, but the way I read that was they just looked at it as the cost of doing business.
Yes, and you can see that here with Southwest, actually, because Southwest, they're here. This is their home base. This is where Jim Spatz lives, but they also have operations elsewhere, and Southwest is actually one of the major contributors over in St. John's, Newfoundland. So it does seem to be,
is that right?
Yeah, it's not just limited to here. That was another spacing article that was up.
Okay, so who's taking the money on the politician side?
On the politician side, it would be easier to name the ones who aren't taking the money.
Okay.
Jennifer Watts didn't take any. Neither did Brad Johns. You didn't have, who else? Lorelei Nickel. She didn't have any development money. Way Mason, he didn't have any. And Steve Craig, he didn't have any corporate development money, but he had some individuals who were developers gave him money as a personal donation. So he was kind of in between the two camps.
The next obvious question is, what are we going to do about this?
Well, I mean, we've got options to regulate, and that's why I wrote the 3-part series on spacing, is because the mayor is asking the province to amend the charter so that HRM will actually have the power to bring in a bylaw to control political finance, because the elections in Halifax are so much more expensive than what goes on in Stellarton or New Glasgow that you kind of are at the point now where we need some higher regulations. And there's a couple things that we can do. The two big ones to me that would have the most impact would be if we brought in contribution limits. So you'll limit how much any one person can donate so that they can't make up too much of the overall pie. And the other one would be you have it at the provincial and federal level, which would be some kind of public funding program to encourage a broader base of contributors in the small amounts. So potentially a rebate, you give $100, maybe you get 50 back, and it's kind of scales from there.
On the provincial level, there are rules against corporations and unions contributing to political campaigns. Is that a possibility?
It is a possibility, and I'm of two minds of it. The one, there is an argument to be made, and I think it's a good one actually, that you should ban corporate and union contributions for philosophical reasons. These are not people. They're not citizens, right? That's a corporate. They're entities. They might be owned by people, but they themselves aren't. So there's a philosophical reason. From a practical side of it, I'm not sold at all that it does any good, because if you look at where the money came from in the 2012 election, what would happen if we banned corporate contributions? I think you'd have all the councillors' returns would start to look like Steve Craig's, where there's no companies listed, but all the CEOs are the personal donors. So I think by banning it, that really hasn't achieved anything. It's just made it look better. It hasn't actually changed the outcome.
You know, the cynic in me knows that I've seen in other places, there's a practice called bundling. So, you know, the developer goes to all his employees and say, you know, why don't you donate $100 or $500 and I'll reimburse you.
Yes. It can be as crass as, well, that'll be the amount of the Christmas bonus,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. But some people would say, what are you, crazy? Developers aren't controlling city council. There's this view that Halifax City Council is anti-development. So therefore, your whole premise is wrong. What do you say to that?
I think the conclusion that you draw, if your conclusion is that the city is anti-development, it's because you fixate on a bunch of the noise that occurs around projects and not the actual reality on the ground. A separate project I did where I looked at actual outcomes to decisions, and you almost never get a project rejected. Yeah, almost all of them go through in the end.
That was what we in the biz called a softball question for you. Yeah, just about every project that gets proposed gets approved, and the vast majority of those lately have violated or exceeded the restrictions and bylaw practices that were meant to contain these developments.
Council did say no to Sky, which was at least holding up the downtown plan.
That was a 49-story building proposed for downtown. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, that goes to, I mean, getting a little off topic here a little bit, but I think part of our problem goes to that we have plans that are so out of date that people don't necessarily have to buy into them that they used to, which kind of creates a free-for-all. So that's what's going on with the center plan.
So will any sort of change happen before next election? We have an election almost a year from right now. So will there be any changes by then?
I doubt it. It would be nice if there were, but the province has to amend the legislation first, and then HRM would have to adopt a bylaw. And a bylaw like this, they're not going to just rush it out. It's going to be, I imagine they would do a series of public kind of consultations, maybe strike some kind of committee. So with only a year until the next election, it seems unlikely. Certainly something like spending limits wouldn't be practical to get in, because you're going to have campaigns launching in the new year, in the spring.
And I should have asked this earlier, but tell us who the biggest recipients of developer money are.
Oh, well, it depends how you look at it. Linda Mosier received the most actual money from developers in like a dollar amount. It was almost $7,000 that she received, but she raised $19,000. She raised the most money out of everybody. So as a percentage of her overall donations, she was on the lower end of the councillors that received development money, even though they gave her a big pile of money. In terms of a percentage, it was Bill Karsten. It was something like 88% of his campaign contributions came from developers. It was basically he went to a couple of developers, whoever his fundraisers were, and they got the checks, and that was all they needed to campaign.
On the other end of that scale is Brad Johns. Love him or hate him, he spends $0 on his campaign every year.
Yes, and actually, to his credit, he raised this issue before, right, under Peter Kelly's.
Well, you know the background of that, right? He was sued by a developer.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he at one point said he accused a developer of bribery.
Yeah,
and he was sued, and that was resolved out of court. But ever since, he's taken the view that there should be no development money in council. Okay, what about you? You running next time?
I might. We'll have to see.
Okay,
I'm not ruling it out.
Word is that Gloria McCluskey is seriously considering retiring. I'll believe that when I see it. But if
certainly
that
last
happens,
election showed that. She has the hearts and minds of Dartmouth.
for better or worse.
Yes.
So, look, thanks for coming in. It's always good to talk to you, and I appreciate your work on this. And again, all this work is found at spacing.ca.
Yeah, spacing. If you just Google Spacing Atlantic, it'll take you to the front page.
Great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Sam Austin, a former planning student and planner living in Dartmouth, about his series of articles in Spacing Atlantic magazine. We'll link to those articles on the Halifax Examiner website for this very podcast.